Welcome to today's episode of the Philosophical Rambler. Today I am joined by Michael Thomas. And Michael, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me today. I'm Mike Thomas. I'm the current director of the Catholic Land Movement. I live in upstate New York on a small homestead with my wife and soon to be six kids. And I've been in the kind of captain's chair of the land movement over the past 4 or 5 years since the contemporary restoration started. And I'm excited to talk with you today a little bit about our work and what we do. Uh, Outside of Catholic Land Movement, professionally, I work in residential construction as a home builder, and my wife and I have about 1,000 apple trees out in the fields that we manage with sheep and have a small farm here in upstate New York. So a little bit about who I am and what I
Sure.
do, and I think why we're here together for a conversation.
Yeah, sounds like you're a very busy man.
Funny what you can achieve when you just have solid habits. So I actually
Sure.
don't feel very busy. I feel very full and very disciplined and organized. But
I
I
understand.
don't feel busy.
Yeah. So that brings us to kind of our first question, I would say is, all right, so you have this life of your construction, you have your farm, your orchard, your family. How does that bring you to the Catholic land movement and really to Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it?
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm a cradle Catholic. So I was raised in the faith, but like many of us, I was raised in the faith. My family's Italian, big Italian family from Brooklyn, and so I was raised in the faith. But I was only raised in a type of like cultural way. Like grandma stuffed a dollar in my hand and said, go, make sure you go get confirmation, go to confession. Like that was kind of
Bribing
it.
you.
Yeah. That was kind of it. It was like not it was never a topic at the dinner table. It was never a, a type of like the central kind of moral prerogative in my family or anything like that. It was just like, we're Catholic culturally. So,
Hmm.
uh, as I got older, I through various turns in life, and we don't need to get deep into it, but I was afforded the opportunity to kind of work on the farm I currently live on, and more or less kind of be home a lot. And the majority of my labor and focus was my family, growing a lot of our food, and then reading old books. And I was afforded that situation for a good number of years. And through that exploration, like a life of the mind, a quiet contemplative labor on a farm, and the kind of duty of my family and my domestic life, through the development of those three different things, I began to see this integration of these things within Catholicism. And increasingly, Catholicism became more and more important to me as it answered questions of life and of the mind, and history and philosophy, social thought and social teaching. So these life of the mind things became very answered in powerful ways by Catholicism. The dignity of my labor and that closeness to creation answered in a very powerful way by Catholicism. And then my role as a father and the order of my household and again completed and answered, and then all of them kind of integrated by Catholicism. So Catholicism emerges as like this integrating force in my life that then also carries profound truths, goodness and beauty, in a myriad of ways, whether it's, liturgy or prayer life or, readings, encyclicals or whatever. So in a myriad of ways, this beauty pours into my life, community. And I began to ask the question of like, wow, this was powerful. Like I wasn't expecting, at 30, 5 or whatever, to have this like massive intellectual, spiritual turning in my life. Like it was not on my radar for that. I'd already had a family for a bunch of years. Like, wow. But nonetheless, it happened to me, in an
Hmm.
undeniable way. And so I began to ask the question of like, have other people kind of retreated to a farm and had this intense awakening or reversion experience. And so I began to
Hmm.
look for Catholic agrarians and Catholic agrarian themes. And in that, I discovered the English Catholic land movement. And once I really conceptually understood it in its historical manifest, myself and a couple other people were like, boy, that should exist again. You know, a network of mutual aid and peer-to-peer education focused on land and handcrafts between Catholics with the idea of answering what the Catechism asks of us, which is, good stewardship of property, of private property for the production of our primary things, primarily for our family, right? So
Hmm.
the beauty in the land movement, right? Wow, this is a good thing. We should do this again, and that really started the path of the restoration of the land movement in the contemporary, at least the iteration that I'm involved with right now.
Sure. Yeah, it's very fascinating to me to hear you speak about your experience because it sounds like you almost inadvertently stumbled into this life, which is a recurring theme that I find with people who are more on the traditionalist side of life, is it's not something that they were exactly seeking out normally, but it's something that they stumbled into and they found how beautiful and how, for lack of a better word, wholesome the traditionalist lifestyle is. And something that I think of immediately when you're talking about labor, when you're talking about constant study, is immediately like a very quasi monastic lifestyle almost, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Um, and really, it is a monastic lifestyle, of course, but with the addition of family, which is its own unique responsibility. So we look at your life going that way. How does that bring you then from starting the movement, which we'll get into a little bit more, but how does that bring you to X or Twitter?
Okay, so I was like many people, I was part of Twitter, long before 2016. Actually, if you look at my Twitter handle, it's funny. It's Michael TG09. The O
Yeah, yeah, it's
nine.
quite hard to quote.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But the '09 signifier being that I joined Twitter in '09. So I had just been on it. I had used it. So yeah, we had a professional life where we ran a couple small businesses. I was in my early 20s and mid 20s. I was involved in Albany local politics, and I saw
Hmm.
very early on before Trumpian populism and the way that social media became a pivotal instrument in the process of the emergence of kind of now a global movement of kind of right wing populism.
Hmm.
Before that was, I think, even on the radar for some people. I really saw the power of this instantaneous lateral communication in its effect in the political realm. And so
Hmm.
I had organized a bunch of things locally. I had actually used Twitter a lot, like in politics locally. In local elections, I was very involved in Albany, like local politics. Hi, Astrid. And and so yeah, so I was just kind of on it, and then as we moved to our farm in 2013, 2014, just posting kind of bucolic pictures of my farm, and not
Aesthetic
not
posting.
yeah, 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 yeah. Not really realizing that I was laying the groundwork, right, for this foray into traditionalist thinking and kind of reactionary politic and all that.
Hmm.
Just surely just bucolic pictures, but but it
How it
is.
starts.
Yeah, it is very much how, right, to quote Dostoevsky, right, beauty will save the world.
Yep.
And so I had this kind of foray into this, and in that, just discovering beauty and agrarianism and stuff. You slowly find accounts like Wrath of Non or like other kind of more aesthetic posting accounts,
Sure.
and then the wheels start turning. At the same time, my farm journey was somewhat of a hermitage in that I like willfully separated myself. Had been afforded a kind of financial circumstances where I could kind of willfully separate myself from the dominant cultural themes and just worry about
Hmm.
scything an orchard, or like worry about planting trees all day or tending sheep all day, and then reading old books, reading ancient
Living
classics.
beautifully.
Yeah, yeah. And then through that, just this powerful kind of shift towards traditionalism happens, and that traditionalism isn't just in agriculture or the order of my family, but then continues to mature as I understand really what embracing traditionalism meant consequentially in like an ordered kind of systemic pattern, right, reaches eventually to sacramental Catholicism and what the the truth embodied there, which then opens up a whole new realm of
Of course.
consideration. Yeah. So that was that was my journey with it. That was definitely powerful to be on, and really continually as a Catholic, right? It's a continual process of conversion. It's not like oh, I converted and now I'm Catholic. It's
Sure.
like I think to quote Davalia, I'm a most days I'm a pagan that occasionally believes in the love of Christ or something, something like that.
I think that applies to most Christians. Yeah.
I think it does as well. So yeah, so that's that's that continual
Okay.
conversion and that deepening of understanding, of what tradition means, and how I carry it, in my work, in my ideas, in my understanding of history. It's the traditionalist as a moniker, the traditionalist mindset or the traditional paradigm or ontology of like yeah, understanding everything um, incorporates a type of relearning because that is not what modernity and its dominant cultural patterns and propaganda and stuff, right, really programs us all to be like these uber progressives, and so embracing it's funny, you go back and all of a sudden all these things that I thought I knew, like, whoa, I didn't really know. I had to look at it from a new angle, and so that process is just like a continual rewrite of history and intellectual life and other things that I thought I had a good grip on, and you discover that perhaps one does not once you adopt a
Yeah.
more traditionalist kind of paradigm.
Sure. I think that's a solid point because what I don't remember who exactly posted, but a couple months ago I saw someone on Twitter talking about how, and it went semi-viral within the traditionalist community, how they were only going to be reading books from before, I think it was the 60s or 70s, just
Yeah.
because they wanted to be before a certain point in mainstream culture where they are um, untainted, so to speak. Now, obviously, you could debate on where that date is of where you want to start buying books from. But that's just one of those reactionary ideas that people have that you're kind of talking about, which is, going back and trying to see what actually is the truth because we're
Nope,
swimming
after
amongst
1954,
lies.
but yeah, totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. And we see it in the church too, right? The
Yeah.
staunch traditionalists in the church talk about the post-conciliar church and kind
Hmm.
of divide time like this in terms of history of the church. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that same starkness in church understandings, but nonetheless, yeah, no, it is true that increasingly as we move into the modern and postmodern era, you get this amalgamation of like ideas and cultural pressure that inverts, perverts, distorts kind of everything.
Yeah.
Until like it's very hard to find a book even like worth reading post like 2015 or something.
Sure.
Everything kind of
Sure.
turns into googly-gok at a certain point. And so or at least if it's not turned to googly-gok, which is a technical term, it is touched by googly-gok and has to respond to it. Well, hence the term
Hmm.
reactionary, right? Like there's really no way, I would argue, to kind of be a traditionalist in the contemporary without also embracing a certain reactionary kind of stance around things. No one has avoided it. I think I know one guy right now. Maybe the Amish or somebody else, um, but most people are deeply touched by the cultural patterns of the contemporary and in all of its insanity. And so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the whole dissident movement and reactionary politics is right now on the right wing, obviously, is responding to wokeism essentially. But we'll see where that goes from now because as we're having this conversation, more people are becoming aware of traditionalism, going one step further, looking back actually to, where can we take things? Where do we actually want to be going? Not just, oh, can we block this one or two bills in Congress? Which is
Right.
what essentially it has been for 2 decades up till now.
Yep.
So moving more in the direction of your organization. So tell us a little bit about like the history of the Catholic land movement, generally speaking, as something that was originally, as we talked about, approved or blessed by the Pope over a century ago. And then if you want to progress a bit more towards the founding of your organization, your iteration of this.
Yep. So there, about we all understand, or some of us to a greater or lesser degree, but a little bit over 100 years ago, we had this great industrial shift in humanity, right? And so many of the old patterns of production, governance, family order, media order, like a huge shift in humanity. And part of that shift was a rapid consolidation into urban centers to kind of feed these new industrial patterns labor. And from that, the terrible conditions of early industrialism in urban places, right? You get these cramped factories, terrible working conditions, the disintegration of the family, and from that, there's a global response to the consolidation of property, power, and wealth in capital. There's a global response to that that emerges, which we know is communism, right? So you get this intense ideological response, and communism marches around the globe and has disastrous results for humanity, right? So just horrific, the genocide and murder of millions of people, the rise of totalitarian governments using all types of social control, and just like really bad stuff. And so the Catholic Church, in her wisdom, sees, both the consequences of the rapid consolidation of property and power in economic liberalism into in individuals, and it also sees the rapid consolidation in of or really disintegration of property and capital and means of production into the state through these various communist revolutions. And the church looks at both of these things and says, both of these things are bad. Both of these things are not good, and so we must have some type of response. And so Pope Leo XIII writes an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, and in that encyclical, I think its subtitle is like the rights and duties of labor and property capital. I forget the exact subtitle, but in any event, he speaks very succinctly and directly to the emergent economic and social issues of the day, which is rapid industrialism and its consequences.
Mhm.
And in that encyclical, he talks about the right to private property. He talks about the existence of the family. He talks about the common good, and he speaks to a Catholic perspective, not a negotiation between rampant economic liberalism or communism, but really a third way, one that reserves the kind of natural right and the natural law that backs private property, while at the same time speaks to common good and the need for a focus in the social order on the dignity of labor, the satisfaction of the needs of the family and the individual. And so he speaks to this a different, not a negotiation between liberalism and economic liberalism and communism, but a complete third separate thing. And so, with that discussion, at some point, he kind of outlines in Rerum Novarum, although lightly, but he does outline, that the ideal, scenario is one in which property, means of production, and capital are widespread, meaning that like the most people can that are able, when a social order tends to enable people to own property and means of production in a widespread nature, it tends towards goodness, and that's kind of what we should be trying to point our social authorities towards, right? Widespread property ownership and widespread means of production, And so dignified labor, so on and so forth. And so from that, a group of English intellectuals, essayists, writers, economists, artists begin to sketch out the practicalities of what the implementation of such a economic or political social order would look like, and give it the name distributism. And so, speaking to distributism, because, or using the word distributism because they're speaking to the wide distribution of property, capital, and means of production. And so, into that discussion walks a Dominican monk by the name of Father Vincent McNabb, who challenges the English distributists to, I'll paraphrase him, but we must prove in fact what we would argue in theory. And so, okay, so distributism is like this great economic theory, and we've written a bunch of essays on it. We have a lot of ideas about it. What does it look like in its practical application? No, show me. Show me,
Hmm.
And so from that emerges the Catholic land movement. And the Catholic land movement was this attempt to, the single word, and you'll see how this single mission statement of the Catholic land movement ties in some of the themes I was just talking of. But the Catholic, so here's a quote from the mission statement of the Catholic land movement, which is, quote, the purpose of the Catholic land movement is the rural resettlement of Catholics onto productive property they own. So I'll do it one more time.
Hmm.
The purpose of the Catholic land movement is the rural resettlement of Catholics onto productive property they own. And so that was the original intent of the land movement, and what they did to these ends was organize vocational trainings and mutual aid societies, which they called land associations, to help facilitate that, right? To help get Catholics who wanted to, out of the, flesh pots of Egypt in the industrial wastelands of, England, and into the, the rural places with their hands in the fertile earth, and in participation with creation and the local economic order rather than the global industrial one. And so that was the mission work of the land movement over 100 years ago, actualizing rerum novarum, the call of the distributists, and then the land movement became the kind of practical expression of this call. And so, to answer the second part of your question, which is like,
Sure. Before we
what?
get to that,
Yeah.
just a follow up would be, um, are any of those communities that were created during that time still existent today? Was there a continuation at all, or are those places that died out, for lack of a better word?
Well, there wasn't ever any like community that was like stamped with land
Sure.
movement. The land movement was more existed as six different land associations in England, and those
Hmm.
associations ran vocational trainings and ran like programs that helped with land placement in communities for Catholics. But it's often a misnomer or a misunderstanding of the land movement to think that. I think it might be because there's this thread. So it's a misunderstanding of the land movement to think that the land movement is creating like breakaway, almost utopianist
Sure.
agrarian communities. I think there's two reasons why our American mind automatically jumps to that when we think about agrarianism. Is one, we have the Protestant revivals in America that actually set up all these, the Shakers and the Quakers and
Hmm.
the Mennonites and the Wacos and the, all these different breakaway communities that formed under these agrarian ideals with Christian influence. And so when we think of like agrarian, Christian motivated or Catholic motivated land movement, our American minds immediately go to the creation of breakaway utopian communities. And then there's also the thread of like, Dreer, Rod Dreer, and the Benedict option kind of
Yeah.
thinking. And so immediately, like, that's what we think the land movement is. So the land movement is not that. And so the
That's a
land
good
movement,
clarification.
yeah, yeah, the land movement is more. it's an organization that's helping facilitate, rural resettlement and the return in whatever ways we can of production to the domestic household, an ordering of the family that allows something like that to emerge, and a mutual support amongst Catholics for the emergence of those patterns, whether it's training in skills or counseling on how to
Sure.
have a well-ordered family, or just fellowship and prayer and work projects and other things. But it is not like breakaway communities. They usually exist in the contemporary land movement chapters. Usually exist within like a parish community, as like a group in a parish community, and they get together once or twice a month to slaughter a pig together, or butcher the chickens together that everyone puts in their freezer, or put in the hay
Mhm.
together, or something like that. And so it's good to get, for your viewers and for you, the clarification that it is not the land movement, as many Catholic things are. It's not like a breakaway movement. It's a Catholicism integrates, right? Catholic, universal.
Sure.
It's always integrating. And so it's an important component. While we do strive for the agrarian ideal in our lifestyles and in our work habit and stuff, and I think all of us kind of have that dream of the yeoman farmer, and absolutely the land movement is attempting to manifest that, but it's attempting to manifest it in an integrated way, not in like a breakaway,
Sure. To
wall
clarify
around.
where I was coming from is to use an example from your Twitter, is your pinned tweet talks about, the pathways, walking in between place
Oh
to
yeah,
place.
yeah,
So where I was coming from is in a sense of connectedness of,
yes,
I feel as though even though the movement starts as individual farms, individual places, that very quickly becomes, okay, well, we're going to move next to family, we're going to expand the land, if that makes sense. So then eventually you have those footpaths that you're talking about where you have farm next to farm, and that's the dream, so to speak. Yeah,
100, yeah, 100, absolutely, but I
yeah,
think that vision and that pinned tweet of mine is like the complete Christendom
sure.
resolution. Like
Yeah,
we've
exactly. So that's why I was saying if that had ever been achieved.
You're right, right. And so there's Catholic clusters now, whether that where people are living around like like a monastery, or the a small cluster of like clutch of a handful of families, like living close to one another and participating in that life. And in my own life, like there's moments of me walking up the field with a scythe on my back to go say rosary with my family. There's so yeah, it does exist, but probably in more scattered ways than like a complete continuity of like ontological reality for a
Sure.
person. Except maybe for like a monk in some, some place. There's probably some monk who's living like the completely,
Yeah.
perfected vision of Catholic agrarianism. But
Perfect aesthetics, that's what people are striving for.
right, right. But yeah, so yeah, no, I love that tweet. That tweet comes from I spend retreat at a monastery every so often, every couple of years. I can make it up there for a bunch of days, and I was walking up the hill to go to like, excuse me, to go to vespers or matins or something, after of a long day of kind of like isolation, and like a walk in the countryside. But I'm walking up the hill through the forest, and the bell rings, and I was like, wow, what if I was like going to my friend's house for dinner, like what if it was, what if I was like coming off of the fields, and like that my this was like the way I lived all the time.
Hmm.
And then that picture, which remains my, I just haphazardly pinned it as my tweet one day, and it's kind of stuck as like
It
a
leaves a good impression of who you are and what you do, though. So,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember very distinctly before I ever really engaged with any of your content or really like knew much about you, was I saved that picture because I just found it to be like very impactful as well. It's a fantastic aesthetic, fantastic ideal to live up to in a sense of, those footpaths, the agrarian lifestyle. It's a very idealized, romantic thing to aspire to. And something that obviously traditionalism does in general is romanticism and idealization, because we live in a very fallen, very dark world, especially today with everything that we see of secularism and wokeism. Um, but I think it's so valuable, and something that we try to do here at Philosophical Rambler is give that ideal to people that beauty, because if we have that beauty, we can strive towards it, as you're talking about, where you have that vision of, farm next to farm, communities building and such. So to go back to the organization, when did you found the organization, and just give us a little bit of the history of that?
Yep. So, um, right during COVID, there was a little bit before COVID, and then COVID kind of exacerbated it, or accelerated it would be the right word. But there was this kind of uh, emergent homesteading aesthetic that was like
I
everywhere.
remember.
Yeah, yeah, everywhere. Mom getting the eggs out of the chicken coop in her sundress with the little kids running around and stuff. That was like all over a whole variety of
Can't forget
meat.
the raw milk in the mason jar, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, 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 exactly. I just actually drank a glass of raw milk out of a mason jar.
See?
So,
Aesthetics become reality.
yeah, totally. So that was really big, and so let's think about why that aesthetic push was big during that period, and I think that in the same way that Pope Leo XIII had an encyclical in response to the rapid consolidation of property, power, and capital, that we have actually lived through over the past decade, a similar kind of monumental and awe-inspiring consolidation of power, property, and capital through like a global technocratic kind of managerial
Managerial elite, to use the words of Charles Haywood.
yeah, 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 yeah. Just yeah, yeah. I'm trying to like give it like a whole title, but we live within like a type of technocratic tyranny, and that really didn't become like penultimate. It didn't coalesce until like the last decade. And so while few of us have like the words to kind of approach that consolidation, it's still written on our hearts that like, wow, that's not really the life I want to live, or the social order that I aspire to contribute to. And so we yearn, even if it's just in our aesthetic senses, for a more human, dignified, local life of communion and sincere and genuine encounter. And that became evident in the aesthetic expressions of all of across the lateral communication fields of these social media things. And so, um, the land movement, I believe, becomes important again because it's giving it's giving an intellectual life, like a life of the mind, a practical kind of organizing rubric, and a practical foray into traditional land and handcraft. It's giving connections to people, like people can connect with one another. And so when we reintroduce the land movement, it seemed to be like this completion of a thought that was responding to the very same things that the original land movement was responding to. And so when we restarted the land movement, we looked at the original mission statement and the original work and the original, motivating principles, and we were just like, let's not change a thing. Let's just so the contemporary land movement is exactly the same mission statement. We hand out exactly the same essays and books as the first land movement 100 and something years ago, and so we really understand ourselves as a restoration movement, which is where we say, we even structurally, even we structure ourselves like the old land movement. Just even the names we use for committees and other things, it's all very, very similar. And so we that's why we say the Pope Pius XII gave the original land movement and its work an apostolic blessing, and those of us who participate deeply in the land movement are just like, we're the same thing. We're just doing it again. So that apostolic blessing continues onto our work because we're doing the same work, with
Bringing it back.
with the same words, with the same structures. It's still the same work. And so, yeah, and so when we started it about 5 years ago, it immediately exploded. We've our first conference had hundreds of people. Our second conference, twice as many. Conference spread to Indiana. Conference spread, the third conference, boom, 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 boom. Then chapters started to develop everywhere. And now, last week there was three different events, one in California, one in Virginia, and one in Pennsylvania. This week there's, I think it's tonight or to yesterday or something. There's an event in Indiana. Next month there'll be events in or 2 months or May there'll be a big event in Minnesota. There'll be there's chapters springing up all over. I think we're up to like 40 chapters now.
Wow.
And so my work became, those chapters often like meet monthly and put on workshops and fellowship groups. And so my work uh, very much came like the propaganda engine that you see on Twitter. Very much turned into my work is actually every single night at 8 o'clock, I schedule a orientation with leadership or a follow up with leadership, and so I develop the leadership skills. I cultivate the rubrics for chapter organization and activity within like a new person who then takes that, applies it to their parish or their region, and starts to organize things. I review motivating principles. I do a podcast where I do some media work, but every single
Mhm.
night from 8 till 9 or 10, I've committed myself habitually to land movement activity. And so this, our time together right now is just another example of it. So that's what the land movement is. By that course of me, setting, understanding and spending time to understand the original rubrics and some of the motivating, principles behind the land movement, and then handing it off to other people and just experientially getting to understand best practice and becoming the contact or point person for all these different things. I kind of just like de facto became I joked for a while and called myself the imperator of the land movement, just because I was like the victorious general, just by
Just
happenstance.
one guy.
Yeah, yeah, but really is the work of all the other people. I just kind of orient people, and then through subsidiarity, like once they get the principles, they get the rubrics, then they're off to, I can't be in Minnesota and California and Florida all at the same time, so it's just kind of rolling now. There's lots of like mission overlap groups that we're associated with, and we've gotten a lot of great press. We've had national articles written about us. There's the movement is, it's kind of like planting my orchard. There was like one branch, or one apple the first year, two apples the second year,
Mhm.
four apples the third year, 16 apples the fourth year.
Just keeps moving.
Yeah, 50 apples. That's the
Yeah, yeah.
same type of growth for the land movement is what's happening now. And so I just keep pace with it, just orienting people and being people's point person of contact. I pay a lot of attention lately to the data sets that of all the different people and how those data sets integrate and organize. And you've seen that we've been invited to Rome and have ongoing conversations with the highest levels of the ecclesiastical, and so I'm
We'll get
involved.
into that.
Yeah, I'm involved with that too. So that movement's just like this really exciting, like very, very joyful, robust expression of something that I believe the world really needs right now, which is real basic fellowship around the restoration of colloquial land and handcrafts, and then a restoration of like real in place, a practical community, not just a community of like you and me like the same video game or we read the same comic book or something else, like actual real community. When I define community as the shared dependencies, right? Shared
Mhm.
practical dependencies. So like if you have like somebody else who you guys enjoy the same media or you like the same ideas or whatever or something like that, though, that's not really your community. That's a club.
Sure.
A community is the person who, like, if their water's poisoned, your water's poisoned. Like if you pull wood from the same forest to heat your home, Your
Your
kids.
neighbor.
Yeah, yeah, it's really your neighbor, right, right. That's what your community is. And so a restoration of fellowship in that real community between Catholics around particularly around the reintegration of patterns that propel domestic production and kind of robust localism and agrarianism. This is something the world needs, and it's written on the hearts of, you talk to people and they're just like, wow, I've been thinking about this stuff forever, but I didn't have words or a pathway to practical action. And now the land movement's given it to me. Man, I want to do this stuff all the time. Let's go.
Yeah,
And so that's what I've witnessed over the past 5 years is that to our Lord's parables, right? To the parable of the sower, right? Some choked, different times the seed of the land movement has tried to be planted. Barren rock, choked by weeds, picked up by a crow. But in this moment, I believe that the conditions were right and things lined up in a way that it fell on fertile ground and like boom, like
sure.
it's taken root and growing.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to hear just how quickly it's grown. And funny thing is, when I first found your account in general, it was probably about 2 years ago. I just had randomly followed you, thought it was interesting. It's probably from the aesthetics, honestly. And I remembered one of the first things that I saw was your conference that was held at, was it Greenfield or Greensburg, Indiana?
Yeah, Greensburg, Indiana. Yep, yep.
Yeah, so I'm from
Yep.
Indiana. I'm
Oh,
from
okay, great.
central Indiana. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is interesting, because it's something that was local. And I wasn't as deeply into traditionalism at the time as I am now, but I was still running, obviously, Philosophical Rambler, uh, meeting all these people, networking, and it's just interesting to see someone who's actually going out and doing something practically speaking, because you're one of the few people who actually runs an organization that's explicitly traditionalist, who's actually doing something on the ground compared to so many other people are just content creators online. Like
Yep.
what I do, I create content, or Andy, like AM Hickman, Shagbark, Hickman for viewers. Many different names he goes by, of course. But he goes out, he creates his content, he travels, but he's not exactly going out and saying, okay, I'm going to work with you on how to do this, going parish to parish. So it kind of leads us into our next point, which is these chapters. Say someone wants to become part of the land movement, they show up at their local parish, it has a chapter. What is that experience going to look like for them?
Well, it's going to look different place to place. So no two land movement chapters are exactly the same because the land movement, right? There's the three principles of Catholic social teaching, right? I don't
Mhm.
know if you, but there's solidarity, there's human dignity, and there is subsidiarity. And so the organizing principles of the land movement chapters lean heavily into those three, different ideas. And subsidiarity says that or dictates rather, that the nature of the chapter, the questions that it's answering, its structure, will take on a colloquialism respondent to the talents, needs, and conditions of the locality where it exists. So in some parishes, there's a reading group and a skills group and a fellowship group. In some parishes, they just do like one big event every, year or something. In other parishes, it's just a reading group. In other parishes, it's like a lateral communication group on Signal that is like doing stuff all the time with each other. Just there's just like all this informality where they're just like constantly organizing. In some structures, it's all of those things. It's like they do all of those things. They meet once a week or once a month or so it's on and on. So it looks a little different. There's general things. It's hierarchical. It's participatory. It pushes people towards action. We use a bit of a framework that a lot of the leadership's familiar with, which is the cultivation of motivating principles, the identification of strategic goals, the division of tactics and action. And if we're not doing all four of those things, we don't have a social movement. We have a stagnant club of some sort or another that's thinking about things. But you must have, in order to have an active social movement, you must have clear first principles, you must have clear goals, you must have clear division of tactics, and you must have definitive action on those tactics. And so if you don't have all four, you're not doing a thing. And it's important that the land movement is doing a thing. At conferences, I always love to bang on the table, and I just start yelling potatoes over and over again, just potatoes, potatoes, potatoes. So the land movement chapters, so look different in the different places where they're at, but then all kind of get together. We have the leadership council and the joint committee where they all get to communicate with each other and then kind of borrow and learn from one another best practice. And hey, I know a B guy, can, you're close to me, can our B guy go to you, teach a workshop, so on and so
Sure.
forth. And that's all right. We're still only in like year 3 of like robust chapter organizing, so we're still kind of figuring it out. And a lot of chapters are just taking their first steps right now. I'm just talking to the Colorado chapter right now, and they're just taking their first steps. The Nebraska chapter just taking its first steps. Kansas just taking its first steps. And so,
Sure.
while other chapters are like a couple of years into organizing and regular events. And so, yeah, so the it looks different from place to place, but usually people's inroad, perhaps there's just like a chapter in their parish that they just see and are like, oh wow, this is a cool thing. But usually people seek it out. So usually people hear about the land movement in some way, write an email through the website, and I connect them with their local chapter, which may not be in the parish that they're in, but maybe they'll spend some time going to events and then say, hey, I'm going to create this in my parish. So that's happened a couple times. Or maybe they say, hey, let's get Mike Thomas to come and do a talk about Rerum Novarum and, the Catholic land movement, and seed a chapter in my own parish. And so that's happening increasingly more and more and more. And so yeah, so that's kind of the process of land movement chapter discovery for people. It's usually that they hear about the land movement through national media or an interview like this or something, and then they say, "Hey, I want to find that near me." And they say, "Oh, look, there's one in Greensburg. Let's go there."
Yeah.
And then from there they get inspired and say, "Hey, let's start this at my spot." Which
Sure.
and so
I'm
start.
curious, um, as someone who's very interested in theology, um, are these chapters typically at more TLM type parishes, or are they at Novus Ordo? Is there like, I'm just curious what the statistics look like there.
Yeah, yeah. So the land movement chapters exist across a range of liturgy. So we have land
Sure.
movement chapters in every not, I want to say every, because there's probably some that we're missing. Excuse me, but we have land movement chapters in the whole range of liturgy, and the land movement as an organization. Well, I think you're correct in calling us traditionalist. Sometimes with liturgical considerations, that word becomes indicative of something else. So the land movement has Novus Ordo parishes that participate with it. It has
Sure.
TLM parishes. I would say that I think it's right to say that a good majority of land movement participants drawn to the restoration of kind of practical cultural things are also drawn to liturgically traditional patterns. And so you do find land movement chapters in TLM parishes, or at least people who are participating are often drawn towards that. In fact, the land movement itself says, where we try and help people. Like if you were to go to the Greensburg, Indiana conference, you would see that like Vespers would be chanted in Latin, right? And so
Sure.
you would see this attempt from the land movement to try and draw people back to the original movement, right? And the original liturgy of the original movement was, the Usus Antiquitor. And so, as a restoration movement, we still try and give it pride of place, but that's not to the exclusion of any other liturgies. And so that's a long answer to a short question, but there's the land movement exists over a range of Catholic liturgies, but it and kind of liturgical preferences. But the land movement itself does, as a restoration movement, prefer traditional liturgy as at least
Sure.
the direction for people to pursue.
Yeah. Where I was coming from with that is essentially it matches very well with a lot of what you would see in these TLM, very traditional trad parishes, people who are very interested in the homesteading, they're interested in family, they're interested in all the aesthetics that you promote essentially. So it seems like it would be a very fit very well for them.
Yeah,
But
it does. Yep.
yeah, but to go into next point here would be what has the reception been like as far as the Catholic hierarchy goes, ecclesiastically speaking? Because like you said, these are organized at parishes normally, but then that goes to the larger point that I said we speak about earlier, which is recently you had the delegation that went to the Vatican. So if you want to speak about that.
Yeah, so we've been received wonderfully by the hierarchy of the church. My bishop is very happy to see. You go to a land movement conference and it's like big, young Catholic, not always young, but a lot of young, big Catholic families who are on fire for the faith and on fire for like bringing good order to their households. And so it's like it's you go to a land movement event, it feels really good. It's like
I can imagine. Yeah,
this vibrant Catholicism that's very beautiful to witness. And so I think yeah, it's gotten a great reception from my bishop. It's gotten great receptions from the priests that I've worked with. We had a great reception. We were invited through my bishop. The land movement was invited to the Vatican to meet with the dicastery and for a brief audience with the Pope. Those were great. Those went really really well. Those conversations are ongoing too. We hope I don't want to I don't know, sometimes hold my cards a little tight, but we are meeting with cardinals going forward, and then so there's that in the very near future forthcoming with the land movement. Some more announcements on that front. Hopefully, our relationship with the dicasteries and various elements of the Roman Curia will manifest into real kind of a consequential and practical fruit soon. But those conversations right now are ongoing and really fun to be part of. So yeah, I would say that it's good. I just wrote a tweet today about how you know the old apostolic age was like us going out into the wilderness and kind of converting the wilderness, both the wilderness of humanity, introducing the gospel and evangelizing the wilderness of the world. Where this new apostolic age that we find ourselves in, that many have identified that we're like in a new apostolic age, is one of restoration. Is one of rediscovery and reversion, much like my own reversion. Like we're
sure.
culturally patterned to be like moderately Christian. We know there's something there, but we haven't really explored it too much. Well, the new apostolic age is a reawakening of and a restoration of really what it means to be a Catholic person, a Catholic community, and a Catholic social order. Right? These are things these ideas are somewhat foreign to people, and so I think the land movement really, really just kind of dovetails as an expression of that emergent new apostolic age, one that looks more towards restoration and remembrance than it does to like an outward kind of wilderness, right? Uh,
Sure.
and so yeah, uh, yeah, that's the our relationship with the hierarchy, which was your question, has been very good so far, and we're very well received, really everywhere we go, and which is
Wonderful
great.
to hear.
Which is great to hear.
Yeah,
It's like I go places and people are very keyed in or kind of primed to receive the message. I think that the land movement is bringing forward.
sure. You show up at mass and they all know who you are from Twitter.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hey, you're becoming more and more prominent as I talked about with Hickman. his account has grown. I've watched it go from 10,000, 20,000, now going to reach 35,000 soon. I've seen your account as well, just continues to grow time and time again. So it's wonderful to see more and more people not only being exposed to these ideas, but especially when they follow you, they keep seeing things in their feed. It plants seeds that
Yep.
eventually grow, and then over time, they look into these ideas, they read the books, start going down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and then, maybe
Yep.
down the line they start planting their own chapter, or making their own organization or whatever content it may be.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that kind of leads up to my last question here before we wrap up, which would be, what do you see the future of the organization being? Like, what are your big dreams or ambitions for what the future of the Catholic Land Movement is?
Yeah, so really we're at a phase right now where I believe that there's strong proof of concept within the existent chapter network, right? We're having events across the country. There's like an event or multiple events every single week. There's real fruit that's coming out of the chapters and it's touching people's real lives. And people are seeing, you can follow along with me and the Catholic Land Movement on Twitter, as you've suggested, Colin, and you will see the very real, here's an event, here's another event, here's another event here, that's just kind of
Yeah,
a steady stream. And so, we recently, in the greater Catholic world of organized charities and nonprofits and stuff, we've seen somewhat of a fallout around orientation and things there, right? There's been a there's there, I don't need to get too deep into it, but there's clearly a shift in focus that is going to occur over the next little bit, and my sincere hope is that both from the hierarchy and from the body of the laity, the Catholic laity, they see the groundwork that has been laid and the real evident fruit of land movement style organizing and actually deliver it resources so we can take the work to the next level right now, which is something amazing for the land movement. But right now for the land movement, it is 100% volunteer outside of like a couple like IT contracts that we sign for like people to do IT work for us or whatever. But like outside of that, it is 100% me, everybody involved, all the people who are dedicating hours and hours of work. It's 100% volunteer with a very small bank account, just to
that's
people.
amazing.
It's incredible how much it's produced with such meager and kind of shoestring resources. And so when you ask me what my real goal is, my real goal over the next year is to see the land movement, and you can kind of watch it if you've been following me for 2 years. You can watch it over the past couple months. I've started talking about it more and more and more. The land, I'm thoroughly convinced through my participation of two things. One, that the hand of providence is in the land movement. It wouldn't have worked and kind of appeared everywhere at once in the way that it has and grown if the hand of providence like wasn't in it. And how many lives it's changed, how many people it's turned towards sacramental life and sanctification of their family through prayer and stuff. Like just we would spend the whole night if I could tell you all the testimony I've received to that effect. So the other thing that I know about the land movement is that if it were to be given even a fraction of the resources that other social endeavors, both through Bishops' Council funding or USAID funding, or all these other even just a fraction of resources to have a full-time professional staff who could really cultivate. I do a lot of land movement organizing in between 8 and 10 o'clock at night. If we could work on it full time, and we had the resources to, really work on it full time, build programming out, build curriculums, build, templates for chapters, have the time. Really, it's time that we're limited.
Hmm.
If we could have the resources to create the time for the handful of people who have already demonstrated their competency and good production, then boy, the land movement could go. What the fruit it would give back would boggle minds. And so my real goal, I feel like, as the current kind of director over the next little bit, is to continue to see the work that we're currently doing, but find and cultivate the resources to take the land movement to the next level, to deliver some resources back to these chapters so they can, buy tabling materials and put on more events. And, so that's turning more and more into my focus is like, it's time to rally the resources to fund this thing that is very, very productive, fruitful, very beautiful, and very important. So that's my work over the next year is to make that happen for the network.
That's wonderful to hear because it's interesting you went from the, for lack of a better word, the aesthetics base to then moving into practicality, figuring out how to do this, and then obviously fleshing it out, creating the chapters, leading it, working on it every night, as you said, as you are right now. And now you're in a completely new phase of, I don't want to say more aloof, but you're becoming more managerial over time
Yep.
as you delegate things, which is something that's wonderful to hear. But my point that I was going to make to what you said is something that I often talk about with people in the traditionalist movement in a broad sense is traditionalists have to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. Because we see so many people who will spend money on the immediate thing that comes to mind is like these big trucks, like these souped up trucks that people love to buy, a brand new like Ford or Chevy truck. Nothing wrong with that. But people will spend like 75, $80,000 on a truck, but then they won't spend like 20 or 30, $50, whatever, donating to, let's say, the Catholic land movement. It's it's something that we see so many times of people come out with initiatives on the traditionalist side of conservative politics, of religion, whatever it may be, and then they always are lacking funding just because people are so focused on, for lack of a better word, more material things in life. So I feel like if there's more of a spiritual or philosophical orientating of our life, of what we're actually living for, well, then our money's going to follow as well. And then you as well then see more donations
Yeah, and so
or
yeah, I
however
de
you get.
yeah, I definitely think that we're on the cusp, or kind of in it, maybe not maybe not on the cusp, but we are like well within phase one of a global shift around kind of right wing orientation, um, but propelled by like Trumpian kind of populism, where people are more considering a traditionalism as the motivating kind of ethos from which like right wing and conservative political power is flowing from, rather than just I think what used to be a more constitutionalist like libertarian kind of. I think there's something to the idea that we're entering like a post liberal phase in right wing politic globally, and with that, we'll see the continued development and integration of traditionalism and reactionary politic into that. And so there needs to be that the natural consequence of that is that these ideas come into more power. They will come into more resource and other things. Participation with the social authority. And so my hope is that the land movement and organizations oriented like the land movement who are using a kind of traditionalist or reactionary themes in their motivating principles will see more of an attention from social authority, from ecclesiastical authority, that which the consequence would be, right, more funding and resources to develop programming that speaks to this orientation. And I think we're already seeing that, and we're just going to see it like in increase as time goes on. We definitely see it culturally on the interest side, right? Like
Definitely.
you and I, as people who are probably both moderately online, see the emergence of traditionalism and reactionary politic as like a strong right wing politic over the last, like, say, decade, increasingly so into the contemporary. And so there's going to be natural consequences. And I hope that the land movement does its little part: agrarianism, localism, strong moral order in the Catholic faith, family focus, right. These are very strong themes in any type of Western civilization, traditionalism or reactionary politic. And so I hope that the land movement does its little part to kind of help give orientation and order to this the reemergence of focus on those themes.
That's wonderful to hear. So to finish up here, just how will, if you want to let our viewers know, how can they help, how can they support, and where can they learn more about you?
Yep. So please, in your charity, pray for the Catholic Land Movement and the good success of its mission work, and the continued growth and kind of positive, well oriented progress. And so that's one. That's probably the most important thing that people listening along could do. The second thing would be go pick up the internet, hop on catholiclandmovement.info, send us a message, get involved with the chapter closest to you, and if there's not, I'd be happy to join you in a scheduled 8 p.m. call to help you get something started in your area. So that's the second thing that people could do, is just get involved in the network in a real way. The third thing that people could do is make a donation, right? Make a contribution. There's a button on the website. Send resources our way. I promise that we are putting those resources into productive and fruitful use. And so those are the biggest, prayer, work, and money. Send them all our way, please. Those are the things that we need to continue to grow. So again, that's catholiclandmovement.info. Follow Catholic Land Movement on social media. You'll see announcements for upcoming conferences. There's going to be a conference in May in Minnesota. Collin, at the end of August, there's going to be another conference in Indiana, which will be our national conference this year. And you'll see a lot of media work leading up to that conference. And I really want to encourage you personally to join us there. I think it would be fruitful for you. And then just see everybody out there. I hope to meet each and every one of you who's watching this at some point, and connect around the work of the Catholic Land Movement.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for joining me on this discussion. I hope that our listeners, viewers, wherever they're seeing this, that they enjoyed it, they got something from this, and that they will go out and be more traditional and find what you're doing to be interesting. But not only that, to actually engage with the land movement and to support the work that you're doing. So once again, I just encourage all of our viewers to go out and, check out the work that Mike is doing, because it's not easy. As he said, it's 8 to 10 p.m. at night. It's something that constantly working towards, as many people on the right are today. So go out, check it out, and support them as much as possible. So thanks for joining me today, Mike, and
Thanks,
talk to you
Paul.
soon.
Yeah, God bless you, bro.